Google Analytics. It's definitely a very, very in-depth product, and for some it can be very intimidating. And I'm one of those that when I first started, there was just, my eyes glazed over when you saw all the different options, and it really takes a while to kind of to really sink in, to really fully get the maximum use out of it. But I would recommend that everyone really gets comfortable and to really step up their level of Google Analytics. This is probably the equivalent to like a $30,000-$40,000 software that you get for free through Google. And you really can't afford not to take all the insights that are available through Google, because it's so impactful and there's so much you can do. And we're gonna, in this webinar, really go through kind of a crash course of all of the different things that you can do. And we can't hit on everything, but we'll give you hopefully the tools where you can find anything that you will need after this. So we're going to try to keep it to an hour, and we're also going to leave time for questions. So if you want to put questions, definitely put them in the question in the chat box, and then we will answer the questions that way. So really, what are the goals? It's really to demystify Google Analytics, really just make you comfortable with all of the different options and with really how to analyze the data, and so you're aware of where to find things and then really how to analyze it. And then we'll also get into how do you customize it. So you don't just want to stop at just what are the default reports. You really want to use it to its maximum value. So you want to going to be able to customize it to a certain extent, and to create dashboards so you have some personalized views. And these are all things that we're going to talk about in this webinar. So jumping right in, really Google Analytics, it's mostly, in terms of navigation, it's really all about the sidebar here. So we went into Home, and we saw that. Okay, and now this is populating now. It wasn't before. So Home is great. It's a dashboard. So a lot of the information that's here, basically all the information here, you're also going to be going to be able to be found on the side panel. So you've Home, and this is great for an overview of the different user statistics. Revenue, if you have an e-commerce site, conversion rate, no matter what your goals are, if they're monetary or non-monetary goals. And I like this graphic here because it compares your data versus a week ago by default. So you can see, for example, yesterday they had 3.6 thousand visitors to the site, or users, and that's up 16% versus last week. One visualization that I like that you can't get elsewhere is the traffic and source and medium. These are really great visualizations to really, if you just hover over it, like this is yesterday, and this is showing us all the sources of traffic. And we'll go into more detail about what these mean exactly, but I just wanted to let you know this is a great visualization to keep in mind, something that I really like to go to when I'm looking at the home screen. Another thing on the home screen that's nice is the cohort report, and this shows user retention over time. And again, we'll go over what this is specifically, but just wanted to show you that's where this is a place where you can find that. And the time of day is nice too. This is something that I don't believe you can find elsewhere in the report. So this is great to find out when users are visiting your site. And of course, the darker shades of the boxes are when more visitors are accessing your site. So this is great for advertising. If you know when people are most likely to visit your site. In Google's case, it seems to be around late morning to early afternoon. Not surprisingly, Wednesday through Thursday, so kind of the middle of the week. And that's just great information that you're not going to find elsewhere. In the customization, and just by the way, first we're just going to kind of go through a kind of a whirlwind tour of the tool, and then we'll go back into more specifics. But in customization, here's where you can do personalized dashboards, which is a great feature, and custom alerts as well. If you want to set up alerts If there's a traffic spike, you can get alert. If the traffic drops, you want to set up an alert for that. For example, it might be that your tracking code's not working, or that maybe even worse, there's something wrong with your site. Real time it's a cool report. It's nice to have. Honestly, in terms of analysis, it doesn't seem to be used that much, because typically analysis, you're going to want to do it on historical aggregate data. But it's nice to have. Typically, the most traditional use case for this seems to be if you make a change on your website. This is a great place to check, is data flowing? So you can check in real time. Say you add an event tracking, which we're going to go over how to do that. Then you can check here and go to event, and then see if those events are populating and the data is flowing into Google Analytics, which of course is super important. Okay, so the real main part of Google Analytics, I would say, is in these 4 sections right here. And it's kind of A, B, C. So it's audience acquisition, behavior, and conversions. So audience, this is where you're going to find the number of users on your site, depending on specific timeframes. Also very valuable information like the number of users per session, the page views, how many sessions, pages per sessions. So this is really some major key stats in terms of the volume of users. But probably even more powerful than that is this tells you who the users are. Obviously not by personally identifiable information, but you can get demographic information like age and gender. Interest, are they interested in movies? Are they interested in photography? Again, this is great for advertising or just to know your audience better. But if you really want to maybe target a site for display advertising, or if you want to use this for Facebook ads, that's great for doing that. This also has things like for technology. What browser are they using? Are they using mobile versus desktop? So we'll go into more of these reports in a bit, but that's what that section is. Acquisition, this is going to be what are the traffic sources? So how are people getting to your site? So some different terminology here. Typically, you're going to spend most of your time in the all traffic report. Source and medium is probably the most used report. And basically what source is, that's the actual traffic source of the traffic, so of the user, like specifically what maybe site they came from or what social network they came from. And medium is more like the overall category. So we'll dive into that, but basically the channels is similar to medium, and that's basically what are the broad categories. Are they coming from search engine, social, directly? Are they just typing your URL into their browser or using a bookmark, or are they coming from something like paid search? So those are some of the broad categories, and then we'll drill into some different ways you can get really granular in terms of the data. And then we have behavioral data as well. So this is, of course, what are people doing once they're getting on your site? So this is going to show some information we saw on the audience overview, but things like bounce rate, average time on page, which is actually slightly different from average session duration. But basically, because basically that takes out the last page or the exit pages to make it a little bit more of a realistic, but more of a sampled statistic. But really, the best and most traditional use case for this section is really if you want to get more statistics on the pages themselves. So if you want to look at, for an e-commerce example, what is the product pages that are getting the most traffic, this is where you'd look. You can also get a lot of information like the average time on those different pages. Are people bouncing? And bounce rate is essentially, are people going to just one page and leaving? More specifically, is it if people are going to one page and not interacting with your site. So if they're not going to another page, or if you have event tracking, if they're not clicking on any items on the page or scrolling. But for most people, if you don't have the customized event tracking set up, bounce rate is going to be the percentage of people who just view one page on your site and then leave. It's a bit of an outdated metric. I wouldn't put too much credence into it. It's good to keep in mind, but there's a lot of cases where just viewing one page on your site is just going to be a relevant experience for people if they get the data that they need. Okay, after behavior rather, is conversions, and this is not going to be populated with any data until you set up goals. So we'll talk about how to set up goals, very important. Once you set up goals, whether it's an e-commerce goal or whether it's a non-monetary goal like an engagement goal, which could be something like, I want to track completed goals for anyone who visits 3 or more pages, or someone who spends an average session duration of over, let's say, 4 minutes. Those are some non-monetary goals, and you can track all of those in here, and we'll go into that too as we drill into this. But here you're going to get a lot of that. You're going to get all your e-commerce information here. So really some really detailed and really insightful e-commerce information's here as well. And just great stuff, like you can see your funnel, kind of exactly how people are going through the checkout process, where there's any leaks in the funnel and things like that. And then lastly, just in terms of the overview of Google Analytics, is the admin. And admin is actually really important, I think more important than most admin screens of softwares. There's a lot of stuff that not only that you need to configure, just a lot of things that you need that you can keep track of here, that you want to that basically that you just want to take care of here. And we'll go over all those configurations and all the things that you can do within admin that are super powerful, and you really don't want to neglect the admin screen, even though it is a lot of information here, probably a lot of verbiage that you don't know, but hopefully this will get you more comfortable with it, and so you can kind of take care of some of those things and that are really important for not only setting up Google Analytics, but really making sure that you're optimizing it. Okay, so as I said, it's really audience, acquisition, behavior, and conversions are the 4 main screens. So with audience, let's go ahead and go into an example of something that you could do. So audience, if you go into the overview, you're going to get a great overview of the key metrics. So some of those we went over, like users, sessions, page views, duration of the session. But I don't really just want to go through what everything is and go through every screen. As you can see, there's tons here, way too much for an hour. What I really want to go through is how to analyze the data. Instead of just giving you the fish, really teach you how to fish. So how to do that is basically going through how do you analyze data. This is a different tool than most softwares that you use, with some specific and unique features. Now most of the screens look like this, but there are some different reports. But I'm really going to dive into how do you analyze one screen like this, and what are all the different options you can do, because you don't just want to stop at the first level metrics, as I call them. There's a lot of cross analysis that you can do. There's a lot of drilling down that you can do. And there's also a lot of different options. You don't just want to stop at the default screen, because there's a lot of different things that you can adjust here to really get some specific, insightful information. So basically, how do you slice and dice the data? First of all, in most every screen, you're going to see the date picker up here. So I'm just going to go through this screen and kind of go through what are the kind of main things that you need to know to analyze the data. So this is pretty self-explanatory. It's super important. So I just want to go through this. You can pick the date range for anything you want to do. In the drop-down, you'll have some default options or some kind of standard preset options, like last 7 days I use a lot, last 30 days. And the easiest way is just to pull it down from the drop-down. If you want to do a specific date range, like say August 8th, until August 22nd, then you can just use the calendar and pick it there. The nice thing, for whatever date range you pick, like let's just go back to 7 days, you can compare it to a previous period, or you can actually even do a custom, but typically you're going to want to compare versus a previous period. Then once you hit apply, that data is going to be added on to the screen, overlaid, so you can compare them side to side. So super useful, super important, something you don't want to neglect. And also something, if you don't see something, a lot of times that's kind of the last thing you think about, but could be the reason why you're not seeing certain data that you expect to see, is that the date range is actually wrong. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to go over is segments. So let's just turn this off to make it a little cleaner. Now the default is, of course, 100% of users. So this is the segment that you're going to see, but you can really get super granular and really customize the view by using different segments. So let's go ahead and do that. So segment is basically just a subset of the users based on certain characteristics. So if we add in a segment here, instead of all users, why don't we look at maybe just people coming through organic traffic? So we can just go into the segments. These are going to be pre-populated with some of the basic segments under system or all, and then make sure you hit apply. And then instead of 100% of users, now it's organic traffic, which is a large subset of our population, 94%. And this is going to give you a great view. Like say, for example, you just did a big ad campaign and you want to separate that out from your organic traffic from what you had last week. So this is a way that you could do this. Just like you can compare date ranges, you can compare segments as well. So if we want to compare organic traffic versus paid traffic, we just add in another segment. And you should have a paid traffic segment as well. So you can basically just click that. Don't forget to hit apply. And now we can compare and analyze those two versus each other. So going down in terms of the actual information and the chart, you don't just want to stop at what metric it puts here, because you can add in a lot of different metrics. So for example, we can compare, let's say, the bounce rate between paid and organic traffic. So you see here that paid traffic, which is orange, has a higher bounce rate, which is a bad thing, versus organic traffic. So that might give us a sense, well, we're paying ads for these users, but the traffic isn't really, maybe not as valuable, because we're seeing more people just, go on one page and then leave. You can also check something like average session duration. And again, you'll see that paid traffic is slightly worse, or not even slightly worse, is significantly worse than paid traffic. So that might be one insight that you pull from this. And again, this might lead you to spend maybe more money in SEO, because you're seeing that your organic traffic is generally a more engaged traffic. And you can also do this on e-commerce goals, and you can really put in almost anything that you want to do. You can do it by different date ranges and different segments, and then kind of do that. So if we remove paid to get this a little clearer, to remove a segment, you just click on the drop down and click remove. I want to show you a little bit more scrolling down on the screen. Another characteristic of Google Analytics is you're going to see these spark lines, these mini charts. These are nice if you want to, in a quick view, see what has been the trend over the time period. If you want to enlarge these to the main screen, you can just click them, and then that spark line, the mini chart, will become the full-on chart in the main area. There's also typically going to be a table on the bottom. And one thing is that you can always drill down on these tables, or most always drill down on the tables. And it's a really powerful way to analyze the information. So right now, again, we're looking at the last 7 days of organic traffic. Now we can get more specifically into only traffic coming from the US if we want to. So basically, you would just drill down to that, and we can even drill down further into the states, going into the city, going into the metro. It can really get very granular into the data that you want. So it's It's really very, very powerful. Now, sometimes, say for example, you've 205 different rows here. Sometimes if you want to find a specific city, it might be a little tough. But you can always use a search bar here, which is called the search filter. And this is a very important way of finding information if you have a very large list. So if you want to look at like just I don't know, San Diego, you can put that into the search filter, and then that's going to pull in just those results out of the 250 that have San Diego in it. So it's just very powerful. Now, if we back up a little bit, let's just go into San Diego itself. You can also change the, actually I want to show this I want to show you some different visualizations now, but to do that we want to get multiple columns in the rows. So let's go back to the city one back. So the default table, or the default view for the information, is typically going to be a table, but in a lot of cases there's going to be better visualizations. So I'm actually going to go back. So one thing we can do is so instead of a table for the users, you can see here that California is 39%, 9%, but perhaps a better visualization for you could be a pie chart. If you want to do that, you just click this over here. So now you can much more easily see the size of California actually really dwarfs New York in terms of the traffic that the Google Merchandise Store gets. And it's just easier to see in this view. So for some metrics and statistics, that's going to be a better view. Again, a bar chart is just another visualization, and it shows, I think, in much clearer detail the differences between the two. So you have pie chart, bar chart. A nice tool is the comparison tool, and this basically compares all of these versus the average. So these are all above average because remember, there's not just 10 rows, there's actually 52. So if we start going into this report, we should start seeing some below averages, and just really a super helpful comparison tool. Not only that, there's also a pivot table option, and this is super important because not only can you look at things by 2 dimensions, so right now, like for example, we can add a second dimension. Let's say traffic source. So if we add source, we can add that. And typically you do that out in this main view. So this not only shows us the state, but also the source by state. So we say within California, the biggest traffic source is, no surprise, Google. Then you have whatever this is, maybe like an internal site, or I guess the email. But the second highest for the general public is direct, so people just go directly to the Google Merchandise Store. And then you have New York. Google is the 4th largest traffic source, broken down by state. So that's an example of doing some cross analysis. And basically what we did there, if we X this out, instead of just the primary region, we're adding a secondary dimension, which is a super important point. And this really creates the amount of granularity exponentially. So again, you just click that in, and whatever you want your secondary sources, it's easier just to type it in. And then your secondary dimension source in this case will be there. But what if you want a third dimension? Well, that's really an area where you can go to the pivot table and get even more granular information. So now we have the region and the source, and then we can even add a third thing here, like bounce rate versus users. So we can see something like that, or we can see maybe average session duration would be better. So we can see those who visit through Google from California, their average session duration is 3 minutes and 21 seconds, while in New York, it's actually, in the last week at least, 0. And that brings up an important point too. Average session duration is kind of a quirky metric, and it's definitely not the ideal metric, because average session duration, how it works is it basically takes the timestamp from the first page, and then when you go to a second page, then that ends the timestamp for the first page and it starts it for the second page. But the way it works, it can never measure what the last page's session duration was, because if you go to a third page and then leave the site, then there's no ending timestamp. So for that third page, or whatever the last page that the person visited is, it's always going to be a length of 0. So you say, how can the length of, average, actually New York is 2 minutes and 24 seconds. But if you look at like direct, these have an average session of 0. So why? Oh no, I actually was right the first time. So anyway, how can a session duration be 0? Well, that's because the average session was only one page. And since when you go into one page, the timestamp starts when you go to this page, but then you never visit a second page, those sessions are always going to be counted as 0 seconds. So just something to know, your average session duration is always going to be underinflated. And that's why average time on page, which I mentioned is a different statistic, is a little different, because that takes out all the exit pages and only uses sessions that have more than one page. So a little different of a metric. Neither are perfect, but just something to keep in mind. So those are some different ways. So just to recap, what we showed in this was we showed the date picker, we showed the different segments that you can do, and then we showed all the different visualizations that you can do within tables and within charts. So now I wanted to go into some questions, actually, example questions, and we can kind of see if these are something, and these are some examples that we can go through now. So let me try to put this into the chat. Here's a question that we will try to answer. So basically, under acquisition in the all traffic medium report, when you add a secondary dimension of sales region, which region brought in the most New York users from YouTube? So that's really a ton of information, but we're really going to go into this step by step. So the first thing, and actually I didn't put this here, first thing is, well, what's missing here? If you're really astute, you'll notice that what's missing is the time range. So we're going to use this time range, September 1st, 2016 to September 30th. Okay, so let's go back to this. So the first thing that we'll do to capture this is go to the date picker and then change that time. So again, we basically want September of 2016, the whole month. And then you just do that by picking that full month and then hitting apply. So the next thing it asks is under acquisitions in the all traffic source and medium report. So if we go under audience, rather acquisition, all traffic, source and medium report, when you add a secondary dimension of sales region, which region brought in the most new users from YouTube? So I know this is a lot. This is very complex. It might be hard to follow, but we'll just go through it one by one. So now we're in the source medium report, and now we're going to add a secondary dimension. So how do you do that? Well, again, you just hit the drop down for secondary dimension, and the question asks us to use the secondary dimension instead of source, what we used before. Now we're going to use sales region. So now we can slice and dice the data not only by the source and the medium, but also by the region. And the last part of the question is, which region brought in the most new users from YouTube? So not users, but new users from YouTube, okay, YouTube referral. So the answer is EMEA. So those are so the answer here would be EMEA. So let's go through one more example before we move on. I'll copy and paste this in. Let me grab this from here. It's into the chat box. The same time period, under conversions in the goal URL report, when you add a secondary mention for sales region and filter the report by that URL, how many goal completions did the EMEA have? Okay, so now you'll see, and this is important, that even if we go to a different report, which we haven't really went into in much detail, you'll see that the screen is very similar. So now we'll be able to actually look at a different screen, different information, and get what we need because we know the basics. So we're using the same time frame. Just double check that that's still September 2016. And it asks us to go to the goal URLs. So this is basically what URL did people complete goals at, whether it's like a thank you page or a thank you after a checkout page or registration success, as it talks about here. Then it asks when you add a secondary dimension of sales region. So we already did that, so we know how to do that. And filter the results by register success. So now we're going to use a search filter bar, which we've used before. Basically, it's that one there, but just to show you how you can do that if it wasn't right there to click, because again, there's 654 rows in this report, so it's not always going to be on the front page. But it's asking us to just look at that URL. And now, again, how many goal completions did EMEA have? So EMEA, registration success, goal completions, 63 right there. So then when we go back to, and this is multiple choice, by the way, the answer is the third one, which is 63. These are actually questions from the Google Analytics Academy. So I just pulled a couple. That's actually a great resource. If you're more on the beginning side and you really just want to bolster your beginner skills, just to get an overview of Google Analytics, less intermediary. They go into some intermediary and some advanced stuff, but from a very high level. You can take the free Google Analytics course and just Google that, take that course, and I would highly recommend that too, to really get just a refresher, or to really get a start on the basis of Google Analytics, if some of this is kind of maybe a little too advanced for you. Okay, so those are some examples, and we're going to go into some more examples later. But now, some things that I want to just not neglect is, let's just go, and I think we kind of breezed over this, but this is important. I want to just talk a little bit about the source medium, because you're going to want to know where your traffic comes from. So if you go to acquisition all traffic, you'll see the channels is going to be the broad category of where your users come from. And keep in mind, if we don't change the date picker, we're going to be getting information that's a year old. So always going to be cognizant of that. So this is going to show you the broad channels. Is it search engines, social, direct, paid search? This is going to provide great information of that. Now, source medium is similar, but a little bit different. So basically, medium is basically the channel, but it goes into a little bit more specific. So if the channel is paid search, the medium could be things like CPC, PPC, so just a more granular channel, basically. And then the source is going to be the specific website that it came from, whether it's Google, YouTube, Facebook. So those are going to be all of the different options. Now, if it's just a regular link at another site, let's say a blog is linking out to you, that's going to be in referrals. And here's where we can get where all the different sites like Reddit or Twitter, etc., are linking out to you. So referral is typically a website that's kind of not part of that social or search categories, like a regular link, more or less, and that's where you'll find that. Now, importantly, you'll see that a lot of people come from the direct none source medium. And what that's saying is that they went directly to your site, they typed it in most cases, but not always. And that there's basically no medium because they came right direct to you. So this, you want to have as much information as possible. So for people who came directly to your site, this is the correct classification. But there's certain people coming to your site where there's no source or medium. For example, if someone came through to your site through like a link in a Word document, that's not going to be reflected in this because that strips out or really just doesn't send any kind of source or medium data to Google Analytics. If someone came to your site through a Skype link or a mobile app, that could also be the case. So those are going to be lumped into the direct or none, and you're going to lose that information. But you don't necessarily have to. So what you can do is you can, if you're adding links on external pages, you can go to the Google Campaign URL Builder and basically add in your website and the source and medium here too, so that it would basically say I'm putting a link in a Word document or a PDF, then I can put in this link instead of just my regular link to my site, put in this, and it passes some parameters that will then say what the source and what the medium is. So super powerful, really important concept. So for example, typically email is a source, but let's say my email newsletter, or let's say my email just doesn't pass medium. So I can say like, you know, email as the medium, because that's again the broad category, and the campaign source might be the spring sale email. So you can put campaign source, and you can also put in some optional terms here, like you've spring sale. You can put that in the campaign name. You know, you can really use these in however way you want to. Typically, campaign term is for keywords. If you have like different ads, so say you have one campaign content like that's maybe red image, you can have that for one, and if you're maybe split testing, have another that has a green image. That's how you can do that. So whatever parameters you put in here, and you only need source and really medium are the best ones to put in, even though it's not completely optional. Then you basically just go down here and you can copy the URL, and you can even convert it into a shorter URL and copy that if you want to do that. So that's an important thing that I wanted to go over in terms of how you get source and medium information into Google Analytics if it's not automatically populated. Some other kind of highlighted reports is what I'll go into next. Is just I wanted to let you know that if you have an AdWords account, you should definitely integrate that into Google Analytics. And then, of course, it's fully integrated, so you're going to have tons of information like what's the cost per click. So you're going to find that under acquisition. For your Search Console, if you're not familiar with that, Search Console is a separate Google product that you can integrate it into here. And this is going to have crucial information on basically your search engine optimization stuff. So stuff like the impressions in Google search results. So how many times, just go down here and show it. So how many times did your page come up in Google search results? Super important stuff. Now, I think there's actually been some problems with like overall and everyone with Google search pages. So I don't know why it's not populating here, but basically typically will. And it will show like, okay, you had 10,000 impressions, and what your click-through rate, which again is super important. Not only how many people are seeing your result in the search engine results page, but how many here are clicking onto it. So you can find that directly at Search Console, but you can integrate it here, and why not see it directly here? Lastly, something I wanted to highlight under acquisitions is campaigns. And this is basically if you have a non-Google ad campaign, this is where you can add in some of that cost data. Like, for example, you can add in your Facebook costs, import that in. So your Facebook information is going to be here in terms of if they came from a CPC, because remember that's going to be the medium and the source is going to be Facebook. So you're going to get that information, but it's not going to pull in like how much you paid on the campaign and what the cost per click is. But you can import that in to get it in. So under behavior, some reports that I want to highlight. So we talked about the basic stuff like analyzing your pages. Content drill down is another good one to analyze the top pages. Landing pages is what pages they first go to your site. Exit, the page that exit from. But some other cool things here are experiments. So this is basically another Google product called Google Optimize, which is a great free and relatively new A/B testing tool. If you run any reports in there, you're going to see the information populate here, which is very helpful. Site search is a good one too. So site search, you have to enable this, and we'll get into the configurations in a little bit. But basically, if people use that, the site search box on your site, and this captures all that information, so it's super powerful. So, for example, the search term for whatever reason, gopher, is super popular in Google's merchandise store. Beanie, so people are looking for beanies. So this can be very good market research. If people are looking for something, for example, and you don't have it, or maybe if they're looking for something a lot, you can make it more prevalent so they don't have to search for it, and you can just put it on the front page. So that's site search. And then I also want to show you behavioral flow is a great visualization that looks a lot different from some of the other reports, but it basically shows a great visualization in terms of how the journey of customers throughout their time on your site. So this is saying that people come through home, that after they come through home, about 95% drop off, 5% go through. Those 5% that go through, they either go through these different pages, and then so on and so forth. So that really gets you a great visualization of the main pages that customers land on, and then where they go to after that. Okay, let's get into conversions and talk more about that. So the first step is you really want to set up conversions, or rather set up goals so you can measure conversions. And what goals are, and you do that in the admin screen, but what goals are, they typically are purchases from an e-commerce site. It could be if someone reaches a destination page, like maybe a thank you page after a registering for your email newsletter. And it could be just an engagement page, like you want a goal to be someone who reached 3 pages of your site. So once you set up your goals, you're going to get all the conversion information here. Another cool thing is that you can set up actually a monetary goal to like a non-e-commerce goal. So for example, you might say, hey, every email sign up to me is generally worth around $5. So in that case, you can add the value, and we'll show you how to do that shortly. So basically, you could then add some monetary values into stuff that's not necessarily monetary information. And then they just have tons of e-commerce stuff, so too much to go through, but just great information. I did want to highlight a few things. One is the top conversions path is an awesome report. It basically shows you those medium, or the media, I guess I should say, but the different medium that will take you to the goals. So most people get through goals, at least in the last 30 days, from referral to direct. It's a great way to look at basically your funnel. And you have attribution here as well. You can look at if you want to do a first click attribution or last click attribution, depending on where you want to give credit to the different sources. That's an awesome way to do that. Then how do you set up goals? So that gets us a little bit more into the admin section, because that's basically where you set up the goals. So let's go through the admin screen and some configuration processes that you should go through. So first of all, to add goals, you go under, so you'll see there's 3 columns here. Most of the stuff is under property and view. So you go under view goals, and then you see these are all the different views they can do. Now, unfortunately, in the Google demo account, you can't add a goal, but basically in your account, you see an add goal button here, and then you just choose the goal type. You choose destination page. This is everyone that entered checkout. So you just say if page has, checkout.com or checkout/HTML, whatever, in the URL, then that is a completed goal, etc. Smart goals is like AI. I haven't dived into that. That's very new. But then you can also do a goal here. Could obviously be, a purchase, and you can do that through a destination page as well. So that's how you do goals. A couple other things I want to mention. Okay, filters is very important. Now you can do a filter at the view level, but it's best to do it at the account level. And a filter is basically, you're going to want to exclude like your internal traffic. So if I'm making a lot of changes and just going around checking my site, I don't want those metrics and those hits and those page views to be included in my traffic information. So to filter those out, you basically want to have a filter, and to create a new one, there's going to be a new button here, and then you're going to get your IP address, then create a filter, and then just say exclude traffic that has IP address equals to whatever your IP address is. So that's a very important setting to do to filter out all the traffic. Another important setting to make sure that you have clean data is you're going to go into view settings, and then there's a lot of like bots and spiders that are going to kind of click on your site, and those are going to be kind of fake page views, not real people. So to exclude them, you definitely want to go under bot filtering and check that exclude all hits from known bots and spiders, and then do it that way. This is also where you turn on that site search. Remember, when people are searching on your internal search box, you want to turn that on right here, and that's how you do that. Okay, let's see. Also under view settings, mention you can do goals. Calculate metrics is pretty cool. So if you want to calculate like a secondary metric, like typically is used for ratios, like conversion rate per user, or product views per transaction. That's a really cool one. So you can basically just create a new one. The button's going to be here, and you simply just type in product views. It's going to automatically pull up that as a metrics, divide by, pull up transactions, and boom, you have your calculated metric. And then you can use that in any report. So if we go back to like the reports, and we can use that as a secondary dimension in almost any report, or we can use it in a custom report as a primary dimension as well. Now you can also create customized segments. So if you go into segment here, and we talked about some of the main ones, but here you can, like for example, if you want to, have 18 to 24-year-olds who speak, French, and have that be a segment, whatever your heart's content, you can basically just choose that, and you'll see it doesn't show here because it's a demo account, but it will show you how many users that is, and then you can apply that as a segment. It even gets as granular as you can do sequences. You can say if someone visited this page and then a secondary page, you can do that, and then create a segment from that. So it's almost like you can create a segment from a funnel. Really powerful stuff. Setting up custom alerts. Here's where you would do that. So basically, you can set up, like, for example, I have a traffic drop and a traffic spike alert. So if traffic drops more than 33% based on the same day and previous period, make sure this is clicked so it sends you an email. It's not in this view, but basically once that is clicked, it will send you an email. Otherwise, it won't send you an email, but it will it will log an alert in the custom alerts, which is in the customization screen. But you're really going to want to get an email if you get something like that. And then, of course, you know, you can get alerts for almost anything that you can imagine, just based on what metric, what the condition is, and how much it changes. You can also set permissions here. You can do share assets, schedule emails of different reports. Some other crucial kind of customization options is the dashboard. So the dashboard, you can add up to 12 different, you can add up to 12 different metrics. Pull one up. And then you can have basically like your customized home screen, basically, if you will, because diving into some of these different metrics, as we saw before, can take a little bit of time, many different steps, but you can just basically do that once and save it to your dashboard, and that's where you would find it here. Some other important kind of customization options. Content grouping is one. So that's something that basically, if you don't like the channel groupings that they have before, or you want a custom one, like say you just want Q&A sites, for example, you can have like Reddit and Quora and maybe some others as a specific type of channel, and maybe you don't want those in social, which I think they are now. Okay, let's go back to what configurations I would recommend. Okay, in property, to get those demographics and interest, you want to go under properties. Actually, tracking information, data collection, and you're going to want to turn on remarketing and advertising reporting features. So even if you don't want to advertise, this will give you all that demographic and interest information that's in the audience reports. So that's how you get that. By default, it's not turned on. And if you want to start building a remarketing list to kind of target people who have reached your site, this is where you do that here. Also, here is where you can do custom dimensions. Like, for example, Google has the custom dimension of retail users versus employees, so they can slice and dice who's coming to their merchandise site. So basically, you can set that up here. That's a little bit more advanced, so that's your user category. But basically, you set it up here, and then you need some JavaScript to kind of track that. And then we don't have enough time to go into event tracking, but I'm going to do a subsequent webinar on how to do event tracking using Tag Manager. But basically, that's just saying Google's default is everything's based pretty much on page views, right? Which page do people go to? But you might want to know, well, what do they click on within the page? And that's not provided by default. You have to do some customization. So for that, once you do that, you can do it through JavaScript on your site, like adding different tags, different information like a HTML element. I would recommend, if you can, doing it through Tag Manager, which I'll go into in a future webinar. But basically, after you do that, then you're going to get really specific information in terms of events. And that's going to be under behavior. And then you can see all the different events, which are more granular user actions that are not page clicks. So for example, they can see people who clicked contact us. And get into even like which page they clicked it on, whether they clicked on email or phone. So much more people are interested in leaving an email. Let's just see if there's any other configurations. Oh, the last thing that I'll mention is really important too, is you're always going to want to set up several views. So you see that the Google Merchandise Store has 3 views: a master view, a test view, and a raw data view. You're going to want to set that up for you, and make sure that that's kind of the case. So basically, the master view would be your main view. This is with filtered data, your customizations. But if you filter things out for your master view, that might be great for your master view. But you also going to want a raw data view with no filters, because if you filter something out and you don't have a raw data view, then you're never going to be able to access that data. So if something goes wrong, you're going to want a raw data view. So basically, you just do that in admin. So basically, your view that's default, just don't do anything to that and just rename it your raw data view. And then when you want to add some filters, maybe filter out like your internal traffic, those bots, then that's going to be like your master view. And then if you want to make any test changes, you can have a test view too, which is going to have basically the same settings as your master view, but then you can just add different kind of whatever changes you want to test. You can do it in that view first. So those are the most important things. I'm going to send out a PDF of some of the things that we mentioned, because I have it in a PDF and some slides, but it really makes sense to go through it in the tool. And I know it was a lot, but I think seeing this, and then also once I provide you some of the information on the back end, like the slides and some additional resources, I think that will make it more clear. So with that, I can open it up to any questions that anyone may have. If you have any questions, you can put it right in the chat box, and then I'll get the chat. All right, so one question I got was, what is the difference between average time on page and average session duration? So we touched on that a little bit, but to go into more specific details, basically to get, so your average time on page, or your average session duration, that's going to be the amount of time that users spend on your site minus the last page that they visited, because Google just can't track that, right? Now, if it's just a single page session, they just go to see one page and then leave, that session is going to be calculated as 0 because they have no end timestamp to calculate that out. But you'll see if you go into like the pages report, there's going to be a slightly different metric, and that's going to be on time on page. And so basically what time on page is, like you can see people are generally on the home page for 56 seconds. So what that's saying is that's taking all the people who they have beginning and end timestamps and using that as the metric for average time on page. And if they exited, which 33% of people do, they just throw that out of the calculation because they don't know the time. Since they exited it, they have no end timestamp to measure the time on the page. So that is the difference. So they're both a little flawed. This is flawed. You know, we mentioned why session duration is flawed. This is just flawed because you're not getting the information from whatever percentage is exiting. So for a page like Google redesign, whatever this URL is, you're not getting information from like 59% of the users. So that's just something to keep in mind. If there's any questions, just put it in the chat, or also you can just email me too if you have any questions. My email is there. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I will set it up, but really just to reiterate, there's a lot in Google Analytics, and I know we went over a lot, but here's some resources that I would kind of leave you with. One is definitely get that Google Merchandise Store view, and I'll send that out in the email to you, but you can just Google it and then add it basically as another account to your regular Google Analytics. Play with that. Just really mess around with different settings. You can't break it. For information and additional courses, use the Google Analytics Academy course. There's a basic and advanced, and you can even get a certificate of completion after taking that. And it's really high level. It's not going to go into as much detail probably as we went into here, but it's very high level. It's very simple to understand, and you can go through it within probably a couple days if you just put in a couple hours each day. Also, if you don't have a site, I would recommend starting a blog like on WordPress or Squarespace, of course, and then just go into the customizations. Now, I'm going to go into a future webinar in terms of event tracking, but that's a good way to, if you want to get into intermediate and advanced and kind of measure those clicks. Don't forget about the URL builder too. So that's what we mentioned, that you can kind of do the different campaign, the medium, and source UTM parameters. So basically that's, you can just Google that, and I would definitely use that as much as you can. And then lastly, the resource that I would mention is the Google Solutions Gallery. So this is pretty cool. You can just like import other people's views and dashboards. So if you do Google Solutions Gallery, it's just people can like upload their like their custom segments, their custom dashboards, and of course they're not sharing the information, but they're sharing the settings, so you can just import that right in. So you basically just add those here, and it's sorted by most popular. So for example, this is a great collection of different segments. This is Avinash is an influencer, maybe the top influencer in the Google Analytics field. He's sharing all of his top segments here. So you basically just import it in, and now you're going to get all of his predefined segments, like loyal visitors and all these that are not kind of the main segment. So you can do that, and a lot of other things like attribution models, dashboards. If you want to just check out what other people are doing in terms of goals, you can do that. So again, I'm going to send all this information out to those people who are able to make the webinar, and to those who signed up. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me at MarTech Wiz, sstanzak@martechwiz.com. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great rest of your day.